So this video is about 1-point perspective, but I just thought we'd look at the difference between 1-point and 2-point perspective just quickly to refresh your memory. 1-point perspective is mainly used for interior spaces. So in this case we're standing inside a room and we're looking at the perspective generated from one vanishing point. So we can start to suggest interior volumes using one vanishing point. With 2-point perspective, we use 2 vanishing points situated at eye level, and this is mainly used for exterior views of buildings in their context. So that's the main difference between the two types of perspective. The thing that they have in common is that vanishing points always lie at eye level. So I would suggest that if you want to draw a 2-point perspective, you look at the accompanying videos on how to draw 2-point perspective, and we'll go on now in this video to look at single-point perspective. So to generate an accurate interior perspective using a single vanishing point, what I've done here is drawn a very simple 1:50 scale plan of an interior space. We've got a couple of openings, maybe a window here and a door here, and I've shown a floor grid which later on will become useful to describe the perspective. If you want to generate a very accurate interior perspective, it's really essential that you finalize your plan drawing first. And what we're going to do is use the plan as a sort of underlay, and then on top of the plan, using detail paper or tracing paper, we're going to try and establish the eye levels and vanishing points. But it's really essential that you start with an accurate plan drawing. Now I'm working on an A3 sheet, so you'll have to think quite carefully about the scale that you want to work at, depending on how much detail you want to show in the final image. But I would suggest a 1:50 or 1:20 scale is absolutely fine for interior views. So here's my 1:50 plan, and we're going to stand inside this space. Just put a dot to represent where I'm standing, and I'm going to be looking directly at this back wall. So my center line of vision is straight ahead and at 90 degrees to that back wall. So that's the direction I'm looking in, and this is where I'm standing. Now, the next thing I need to do is establish what we call a picture plane. So for the sake of ease, I'm going to situate the picture plane to coincide directly with this back wall, the interior face of this back wall. And what I'm going to do now is use detail paper to work on top of the plan without altering the plan. Use a separate sheet of detail paper. It just makes things a little bit clearer as we go along. So there's the plan, and over the top I can lay over the elevation. So the ground line of that elevation is going to coincide with the picture plane. Exactly the same line, and I can draw the elevation of that back wall now to the same scale, exactly the same scale as the plan. So in this case, I'll just generate something 3 meters high, and if I slip an opaque sheet of paper in between the two sheets, you can see exactly what I've done. So this is the elevation of that back wall on plan. It just makes it a little bit simpler to work on 2 different sheets, because effectively what we're going to do is one drawing on top of another, and unless you can separate those 2 drawings, the whole image starts to get very cluttered, as you'll see a little bit later on. So the next thing I need to do is, on the elevation, is to decide how high my eye level is going to be. I know that this is my center line of vision. This is the direction I'm looking at, the center line of the space. Now, normally an eye level would be placed 1.6 meters above ground level. So we can draw a horizontal line 1.6 meters above the ground level, and this will represent our eye level as we're standing in that space. So there's my eye level, and that is 1.6 meters, being the average adult eye level above ground. So I know then that my vanishing point lies at the intersection of the eye level and my center line of vision. So now we've drawn the elevation sitting above the plan. We can start to generate now the perspective. So I know that this is my vanishing point. From the vanishing point, take a line through the bottom right hand side of the elevation and bring that line forward. So this represents the skirting line, if you like, or the intersection between the ground and the wall at that point. And the same on this side. And to represent the ceiling, we can do exactly the same. Take a line through the vanishing point and out. So if we were to complete those lines, they would all coincide at the same vanishing point. So here we've got the junction between the floor and the wall at ground level, and here we've got the intersection between the ceiling and the wall. So we can already see that we're starting to generate an interior looking view straight away. So the next thing I can do is go back to the plan and have a look at this floor grid that we marked on earlier, so we can just tick off where that floor grid intersects the elevation. Then going back to the elevation, we can start to generate lines that represent that floor grid in perspective, all radiating from that single vanishing point. And just to make that a bit more obvious, we'll just draw those in a thin pen. So now we're starting to get an idea of the floor plane which occupies this space. But we need to find out now how that floor grid gets further and further apart as it comes towards us. So we go back to the plan. And from where we're standing, which was this point, take a line from the point where we're standing through the intersection of the floor grid on plan with the wall, and carry on doing exactly the same for the next floor tile. Now if we slip the opaque sheet underneath, we can see exactly what we've done. So from the plan position from where I was standing, I've taken lines through that floor grid until it intersects the bottom of the wall. So now I can draw horizontal lines from the point where the line intersects the wall, and you can see that the floor grid is starting to get further apart as it comes towards us. So it's actually mimicking the way that the human eye sees depth or perceives depth. So if we refer back to the plan now, what we're drawing is this floor grid in perspective. And if we were to try and do that all on one drawing, it would get really confusing, so that's why I've separated the two drawings out. So looking at the plan again, we drew or suggested that there was a window opening here, and I've just hatched in the thickness of the wall just to make that a little bit more obvious. So to represent that window opening in perspective, we need to look at how to do that, and we can do that in more or less the same way that we did the floor grid, by taking lines from where we're standing on plan through the top point of that window. Take a line through there and over to the intersection of the bottom of the wall and the floor, and stop. Take a line through this point of the window opening over to the intersection of the wall and floor, and where we meet that junction, take a vertical line up. We don't know how high this window is yet, but we know from these two construction lines we know the left and right hand side of that opening in perspective. Now, just for the sake of ease, we'll make that window sill 900 millimeters high, and if we make the top of the window 2.1 from ground level, we can plot the top and bottom of that window using lines from the vanishing point. So from the vanishing point through the top of the window, and from the vanishing point through the bottom of the window sill. And the resulting shape represents that window opening in perspective. So there it is, that opening represents this opening on plan. So we can also, depending on the scale of drawing that you're working at, we can represent the depth of that window. So the thickness of the wall, in other words. So if we wanted to plot this point, which represents the thickness, the depth of that wall, take a line from where we're standing through that point and over to the intersection of the thickness of the wall, which is here. And the same again for this point. Which is there. So we can extend that vertical line upwards now and start suggesting the depth of wall. The horizontal line would suggest the window sill and the window head, and using the vanishing point we can suggest the depth of that wall. So you're starting to see that we can build up the complexity of this perspective to start representing openings, windows, doors, and we can do exactly the same process on this side for the door opening on plan.